Hi, and welcome to part four of when the well runs dry. January 17th. More rain again today, on and off. Molly slept with me last night and had started following me around. I'm not sure what's got into the old girl. Today I washed all my plant pots. It helps to control pests and diseases. Giving them a good wash every year. I boil up loads of water on the stove, put all the and trays in the bath, and scrub them with a brush and some of my homemade soap. It's important to clean all the pots and trays because little bugs and bacteria can gather in the cracks and crevices and will cause all kinds of problems for young seedlings. I also cleaned out the inside of the greenhouse and polytunnel and used a little bit of repair tape to cover up small tears in the polytunnel. Once I'd done this, I added some of the compost I'd sieved last week to the beds in the polytunnel and then washed the empty bags. All day I've been thinking about the village and what it might be like down there. The thought has frequently occurred to me, and I'm not proud of it, that there might be things in the village that would be useful to me. I know that whatever I might find does not belong to me, but with the owners dead, they're not going to make use of it anymore. And I don't think they would begrudge me the use of them. I've resolved to go down to the village on the next dry day and see what I can find. I'll take some bags to bring back anything which might be of use. I'll also take a knife for self-defense, though I'm not sure what use it will be. If there's anyone there who's not pleased to see me, I'll go via the fields, the same way Mark fled after seeing Sophia raped and murdered. I've resolved to go to his house and see what I can find. January 18th. Today was the day. It was cloudy but no rain. As soon as I got up, I had two boiled eggs and a cup of tea before grabbing the bag I'd already prepared and headed off through the fields towards the village. The fields, which used to be full of crops of grazing cattle, now grow weeds and long grass. The overgrown hedges made it easy to move unnoticed towards the village. I was conscious that I must have been retracing the steps that Mark must have taken last year, only in reverse, and I emerged at the foot of his garden. The garden was a mess, as if someone had ransacked it, and now all the vegetable beds were covered in weeds. The door of the chicken coop was wide open, and I made a guilty mental note that the wire on the walls and door might be useful for repairs to my coop. Skirting the edge of the garden, I made my way towards the house, which had been gutted by fire. I crept up onto the patio towards the hole in the wall where the French doors had been. The windows were broken and the frames were charred by the fire. I didn't see her at first. When I looked into the darkness of the smoke blackened room, I saw her, a black corpse lying in the center of the room. At first, I turned away, looking instead at a low, drawn up curiosity. I looked again. The body was unrecognizable, but I knew from what Mark had told me that it was her. I stayed for a moment and thought of Mark and Sophia. Nothing I could do would help either of them now, and taking a breath, I walked slowly around the side of the house where the wooden gate lay open. Moving to the front of the house, I stopped at the gate, peering out towards the village main street. All of the houses I could see had received the same treatment as Mark's. Most of the roofs were missing along with the windows, and smoke had stained the walls around every opening. I walked through the overgrown front garden and into the street, looking both ways along the road before walking along it in the direction of the square where the market traders used to gather. Bodies littered the road and many of the gardens. They had been partially eaten by what I assumed had been a combination of wild dogs and birds. I gave each of them a wide berth, and although I was sure no one was in the village, I reached for the knife inside my bag. As I approached the White Hart on the corner of the square, it became clear that it had burned too. They'd spared nothing and no one. I decided not to go into the pub just yet, but instead I continued into the square. Debris and half-eaten rotten corpses littered everywhere. A terrible stench of rot filled the air. I felt unable to see any more, for now and retraced my steps to the pub. I only needed to look through the window of the lounge to see that fire had destroyed everything inside. I could make out some charred corpses beneath burned joists and rubble that had collapsed on top of them. It was then that a thought occurred to me. The White Hart had a cellar. Perhaps some things or someone had survived in there. Clutching the knife, I entered the pub, crossing the lounge and heading for the bar, behind which I knew was an entrance to the cellar. There was a lot of debris, and the thought occurred to me that what remained of the upstairs floor might not be entirely safe. There was a reasonable amount of debris littering the floor behind the bar, which I kicked aside, trying to find the trapdoor. The fact that the entrance to the cellar was not clear was almost certainly proof that no one had successfully hidden there. I found the wooden door and cleared away the debris to find the latch, which I opened, pulling the door up and peering into the darkness below. "Hello?" I shouted with just a little bit of optimism, but there was no reply. I tried to peer into the darkness, but it was useless. I promised myself that next time I would bring candles. I could swear I could just hear something in the darkness, but I couldn't be sure, so I left it and rushed back the way I had come. January 19th. My plans to return to the village today were confounded when I awoke to discover the entire valley covered in a thick blanket of fog. I could barely see the tree line of the wood from the house, so I did not fancy a trip into the graveyard of a village, unable to see what was around the corner. They obviously stole everything from the village that was of value and burned the rest, but there might still be things like Mark's chicken shed, which are of no value to them but very useful to me. The fog made everything wet, so I confined myself to the house with Molly, who was very upset about me leaving yesterday. She's still very affectionate again today. I wonder how long this newfound friendship will last. She must be cold. I keep thinking about the half-eaten, half-decomposed corpses that litter the village. The thought has occurred to me that there might be all manner of disease in that village, and to bring anything back from it could be a big mistake. Is there anything in the basement of the pub of real use to me? I also thought of the butcher where I used to take my excess chicken and goats. I expect that when they came, they took anything metal out of the butcher's shop. Not because they want to do legitimate butchering of their own, but because the metal would be worth something to trade or sell for silver. Nevertheless, I'd like to see for myself. January 20th. When I looked out the window this morning, I was secretly hoping for more fog or rain, but instead the sun, peeping through the clouds, greeted me. It seems I had no excuse to postpone my return to the village. I packed a bag with some tools, a beeswax candle, and one of the lighters I've hoarded. I have quite a few and hoped that maybe I would find more today. I left straight after breakfast. This time I was less careful and headed straight for the road, which terminates or starts, depending on your point of view, at the edge of the wood which forms the boundary of my property. I deliberately allowed the old entrance to grow over with bushes, so that any intruders would imagine that the owners had abandoned the property long ago. So far, it worked. Replacing the section of removable fence which serves as my actual entrance was easier said than done, as it had become overgrown during the months I hadn't used it. I'm not as strong as I used to be and struggle with any work which is very physical. Once I'd managed to get it looking as natural as possible, I headed off down the road, which is no more than a track this far up the valley. Although I was less cautious than the first, I was still nervous as I turned each corner on the way to the village. But when I reached the first houses, the street looked as I had left it, as if nobody or nothing had been through the village, and why would they? I headed straight to the pub and straight behind the bar and lifted the trapdoor of the cellar. Lighting my beeswax candle, I climbed the stairs into the dark basement and shone the light around. The shelves were empty. They really must have taken everything. I stepped down onto the stone floor and heard a noise behind me. I swung around and shone the light, but just heard a scurrying, probably a rat. Then a box fell off the shelf and there was a scratching noise, and a black shape flashed across the room and out through a gap in what must be the street entrance to the cellar. It looked like a cat, but I couldn't be sure. I shone the light on the shelves, but it looked like they'd stripped everything out. Even the piping, which had led to the bar upstairs, had gone. The box which had fallen was empty and damp, and the cellar itself had a foul smell. I climbed back up the stairs, extinguished the candle, and resolved to head straight to the butcher's shop on the other side of the square in the hope that they had left behind some equipment. I chose a route which kept me as far away from each of the rotting corpses as possible, until, on reaching the far side of the square, I could see that fire had gutted the butcher's shop, along with every building on the road. Nevertheless, I headed for the entrance and peered inside. The shop itself was black with smoke damage, but the floor above looked intact, so I ventured inside, eager to get to the back room where they had done the butchering. In my haste, I crossed the center of the room, but froze when I heard a splintering of wood and the floor shift. I only froze for a moment before realizing that the center of the floor was the worst place to be. I made a move for the edge of the room, but as I did, the entire floor gave way, and I fell along with the floor into the room below and landed with a splash in 2 feet of water. The floor fell around me, and a chunk of floor tile hit me on the head, cutting me and sending a dribble of blood down my forehead and nose. I was soaked, and from the smell of the water, I assumed the water was filthy. I did not want to touch my wound for fear of infection. A little light entered through the newly made hole, and I could see that they must have used this as a cool room. The stench was probably rotting animal flesh. In the dull light, I could make out a door and waded over to it, only to find it locked. Looking around the room, I could see that in one corner there stood a set of shelves. Perhaps if I was able to move these to the center of the room, I might be able to climb out. Pots of what might have been herbs were covering the shelves, possibly even tubs of salt, but this awful stench in the room made me fearful of disease, and I didn't take any of the pots or tubs with me. Instead, I cleared them off into the water and pulled at the shelf. It had been fixed to the wall, but not so much that I couldn't pull it loose. Moving the shelf took quite a bit of effort, and I was glad I had chosen to wear gloves, which protected me from the metal corners of the shelving. I pulled the shelves slowly across the floor, through the water, until I felt something brush against my leg. I kicked at it, thinking that it might be the remains of some butchered animal, or perhaps a dead rat. But as I kicked, it became clear that whatever it was connected to something much larger, and giving it a bigger shove with my foot, I could see that what I was kicking was actually a human corpse. First, I pulled away in horror, but when I'd had time to calm down, I took the beeswax candle and a lighter out of my now wet bag. It was kept dry in the case you gave me for my birthdays. I forgot when. After a couple of tries, I managed to light it. They say that it's possible to get used to anything, and I'd already seen enough corpses in the village, including Sophia's, not to be shocked at every new corpse I encountered. The corpse of a child. It was the first time I'd seen a dead child, and I just wanted to get out of the water we were sharing as quickly as possible. It was clear to me that the bodies belonged to the butcher, his wife, and his daughter. They must have hidden down here when they came and had been able to escape. Had they died of starvation? Perhaps the smoke from the fire had asphyxiated them. I hoped it was the latter because a pang of guilt was gnawing away at me, telling me that had I come to the village sooner, I might have found them and been able to help them. How many others might have hidden in their basements, only to find themselves trapped? The question is now academic, as no one could have survived this length of time unless they had enough provisions, which is highly unlikely given the lack of everything at the moment. I put out the candle and placed it back in its case, and dropped it back in my bag with the lighter. Then I pulled the shelves into the center of the room, kicking the corpses of the butcher and his family out of the way as I went. The shelf wobbled as I climbed, and I was worried that it might topple over, dumping me into the water along with the rotting remains. Fortunately, it stayed upright, and I was able to stand on the top shelf and reach what remained of the floor. The floor was made of tiles, and this made it difficult to find anything to grab. On the side furthest from the street, most of the floor had fallen away, exposing the joist, which I was just about able to grab onto, to pull myself up and crawl to the edge of the room, where a part of the floor remained. I pulled myself up, which was no mean feat for a man of my age, and managed to sit with my back against the wall, hoping the remaining floor would not give way. I edged around the wall until I reached the door leading through to the room where they would have prepared the joints of meat. With my back pressed up against the wall, I stood up and edged around into the back room. There was no sign of any equipment, and fire had badly gutted the room. I had no confidence in the floor, so, sticking to the edge of the room, I made my way back to the door, which I could see was wide open. When I reached the door, I could see the cause of the butcher's fate. The entire staircase had collapsed on top of the stairs to the basement, making it impossible to open the basement door. I wonder how many other villagers met a similar end. I had enough for today, though, and came back as fast as I could to wash all the filthy water off my clothes and skin. I hope you enjoyed part 4. Click to subscribe and press the bell for notifications if you'd like to know when part 5 will be available. If you check out my channel, you'll also see me reading Living with Sassy, The Astonishing Adventures of James and David, Fred and Leah, and my latest book, Living with the Headless Mule. I hope to see you on one of those videos. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.